The bitter wind howled through the narrow streets of Chicago, carrying with it the promise of the coldest night in decades. Sarah Mitchell pressed her forehead against the frosted window of her tiny apartment, watching the snowflakes dance violently in the amber glow of the streetlights. She had just enough money to keep the heat running for another week, maybe two if she was careful. Her waitressing job barely covered rent, and the tips had been scarce lately. But Sarah had never been one to complain. She had a roof over her head, and that was more than some people could say. That's when she saw her, a figure, huddled against the brick wall of the building across the street, covered in what looked like layers of newspapers and torn plastic bags. Even from this distance, Sarah could see the woman shaking, her body convulsing with each gust of wind. For a moment, Sarah's practical mind kicked in with all the reasons why she shouldn't get involved. She didn't know this woman. She barely had enough for herself. Getting involved could be dangerous. But then the woman looked up, and even through the snow and distance, Sarah saw the desperation in her eyes. Without thinking twice, Sarah grabbed her coat and rushed down the 3 flights of stairs, her worn sneakers slapping against the concrete steps. By the time she reached the woman, her own teeth were chattering. Up close, she could see that the stranger was younger than she'd first appeared, maybe in her late 20s, with dark hair plastered to her pale face and lips turning blue from the cold. Hey, can you hear me?" Sarah knelt down, gently touching the woman's shoulder. The stranger's eyes fluttered open, filled with fear and confusion. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you, but you can't stay out here. You'll freeze to death." The woman tried to speak, but her words came out as incomprehensible mumbles. Without waiting for a response, Sarah hooked her arm under the stranger's shoulders and helped her to her feet. The woman was surprisingly light, as if she hadn't eaten properly in days. Together they stumbled, back across the street and up those 3 flights of stairs that now seemed endless. Once inside her modest apartment, Sarah guided the woman to the old couch and wrapped her in every blanket she owned. She turned up the heat despite knowing it would cost her, and rushed to the kitchen to make hot tea. Her hands trembled as she poured the steaming liquid into a chipped mug, not from the cold, but from the weight of what she'd just done. She had just invited a complete stranger into her home, and she had no idea who this person was or what her story might be. "Here, drink this slowly," Sarah said, pressing the warm mug into the woman's frozen hands. As the warmth began to seep back into the stranger's body, her features became clearer. She had delicate features and eyes that, despite their current state of exhaustion, held a certain depth and intelligence. "Thank you," the woman finally whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "You don't understand. I had nowhere else to go. My phone died, I lost my wallet, and she trailed off, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sarah sat beside her, not pressing for details. "You're safe now. That's all that matters. What's your name?" "Emma," the woman replied. "Emma Chen." That night, Sarah gave Emma her own bed while she curled up on the couch. She lay awake for hours, wondering about the woman sleeping in the next room, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake or if fate had brought them together for a reason. The wind continued to howl outside, but inside, 2 strangers found warmth in the simple act of human kindness. When Sarah woke the next morning, Emma was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table, looking more alert but still wearing the same exhausted expression. Sarah made breakfast. Just scrambled eggs and toast. Nothing fancy, but Emma ate like it was a feast at a 5-star restaurant. "I need to tell you something," Emma began, setting down her fork. "Last night I was at my lowest point. I'd been robbed, left with nothing, and I genuinely thought I was going to die on that street. You saved my life, Sarah. You didn't have to, but you did, and I'm going to remember that for the rest of my life." Before Sarah could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Both women froze. Sarah cautiously approached and peered through the peephole. On the other side stood a tall man in an expensive-looking suit, flanked by 2 others who looked like they belonged in a Secret Service detail. "Can I help you?" Sarah called through the door, her heart racing. "I'm looking for Emma Chen." The man's voice was firm but polite. "We've been searching for her all night." Emma rushed to the door. "It's okay, Sarah, let them in. That's Marcus, my father's head of security." Confused, Sarah opened the door. Marcus immediately rushed to Emma, relief flooding his face. "Miss Chen, Your father has been out of his mind with worry. When you didn't arrive at the hotel and we found your phone and wallet—" I know, Emma interrupted. "I'm fine, thanks to Sarah." Within the next hour, Sarah's tiny apartment was filled with people. But the most striking entrance was that of an older gentleman with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. And when he looked at Sarah, she felt like he could see straight through to her soul. "I'm Richard Chen," he said, extending his hand. "Emma's father. I understand you saved my daughter's life last night." Sarah shook his hand, still processing everything. I couldn't leave her out there. Anyone would have done the same." Richard smiled sadly. "You'd be surprised how few people would, Sarah. In my position, I've learned that kindness like yours is rarer than you think. I want to repay you for what you've done." "That's not necessary," Sarah said quickly. "Really, I didn't do it for any reward." "I know you didn't," Richard replied. "That's exactly why I want to help you." He glanced around the apartment, taking in the worn furniture, the small space, the bills stacked on the counter. "Emma told me you're a waitress, that you were worried about your heating bill even as you turned up the heat to save her." Over the next hour, Sarah learned that Richard Chen was one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the world, worth billions. He had built his empire from nothing, and he never forgot what it was like to struggle. When Emma had insisted on experiencing real life without her family's security detail, she'd ended up in the worst situation possible. But in that darkness, she'd found something her father's money could never buy: genuine human compassion. Richard didn't just offer Sarah money. He offered her a job at his company's Chicago headquarters, with a salary that made her head spin. He paid off her debts, covered her rent for the next 2 years, and set up a scholarship fund in her name for other young women facing financial hardships. But more than that, he and Emma became part of Sarah's life. 6 months later, Sarah stood in her new apartment, spacious, warm, filled with light, and thought about that freezing night. She had been promoted twice at Chen Technologies, not because of favoritism, but because her compassion and work ethic proved valuable in ways that couldn't be taught. Emma had become one of her closest friends, and together they'd started a foundation to help homeless individuals in Chicago. But the most profound change wasn't in Sarah's bank account or her career. It was in her understanding of how one moment of kindness could create ripples that extended far beyond what she could have imagined. She had opened her door to a stranger on the coldest night of winter, and in return, the universe had opened 1,000 doors for her. As she looked out at the city skyline, Sarah smiled. She had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to act with compassion when it would be easier to look away. And that lesson was worth more than any billionaire's fortune could ever be.